Welcome back to another one of my videos. Hi, this is Reese from Reese Teaches Programming, and we are talking about pipelines. And I've used this word quite a bit throughout our journey into DevOps. But before we jump into our first kind of bit of lab work in getting our DevOps pipeline set up, I want to make sure we understand what is a pipeline. So, a pipeline is an automated workflow that takes your code from development all the way to deployment. So that's working through a lot of these testing steps that we've talked about. It walks through some and automates some steps like building and testing and packaging and making sure our packages are up to date, and then into release, whatever that looks like. So a pipeline is kind of like an assembly line. Each step moves your software closer to production, and we want that with minimal manual effort. So in this scheme of things, maybe it's evident, but why are pipelines important? Well, they're really essential to DevOps because we are working towards speed and consistency in our build process. So they make sure every release goes through the same checks and validations, and that means fewer bugs, faster updates, and better software quality. So that's what we're looking for. We want that fast feedback, remember? That's critical, especially if you're in an agile team, to get that feedback to developers about what isn't working as quickly as possible. So what goes into a pipeline? So typically, a pipeline is triggered automatically, maybe when we push to GitHub or we open a pull request. And so it kicks off our stages, such as restoring dependencies, compiling code, running tests, creating build artifacts. We can do different types of tests in that testing phase, all the different types of tests we've talked about. We can package code for deployment, and then we move that code and push it to our staging environment or our production environment, depending on what your next steps need to look like. And you can even include things like static code analysis, security scans, custom approval steps, all kinds of things that you build your pipeline for what you need based on your application, your organizational needs. And then that way it's automated and everyone does the same thing when that action is kicked off. So here is an example of a basic pipeline workflow. And essentially this is what we're going to be setting up as we move into, our hands-on lab work section of this. So a developer pushes code to GitHub, and that is going to trigger the pipeline. It then restores dependencies, builds the project, runs some tests, packages everything up, and if it passes, so it runs tests, and if everything passes, it packages the code and then deploys it to staging or production. And this is all going to happen automatically once that pipeline is configured. So, tools. We talk so much about tools. The one that we're going to look at here soon is GitHub Actions, which is great. Built into GitHub, already integrated, making pipelines for teams that are already using GitHub. There's also Azure pipelines. So if you are maybe deploying something to Azure, you've got an app service or something like that, Microsoft's CI/CD platform already has and integrates in well with Microsoft's tools and already does a lot of this for you. GitLab has their things, CI/CD tools built right into GitLab. And then you maybe have heard of Jenkins. This is an open source CI/CD platform with lots of plugins, highly customizable. Lots of teams are using Jenkins. And then also Circle CI. So this is more of a cloud native, built for scale. You get this in a lot of bigger companies. So when we are talking about tools, remember the one thing about DevOps is there's a lot of tools. There's a lot of things to choose from, but really it's kind of platform and stack dependent. We don't have to learn all of these tools. In fact, you may never touch some of these things because maybe you always work in a particular stack, and that's fine. So types of pipelines. There are really four main types of pipelines that you might build. A build pipeline is really there to handle compiling and packaging code. A test pipeline is set up to run your different types of tests, right? Your unit tests, your integration tests, anything else that you want to set up in there. A release pipeline versions and prepares your builds for deployment. And then a deployment pipeline automates delivery into staging or production. So your application or your organization, depending on your needs, may have one long pipeline that just incorporates lots of different tasks like we looked at on that previous slide. Or you might have several of these smaller types of pipelines that you're interweaving together and kind of kicking things off in different places based on the type of application or what it is that you're wanting to test or what kind of build you're doing. So some best practices. So to get the most out of your pipelines, here are some things to think about. We want to keep them fast, right? So we want to aim for results under 10 minutes because honestly, software developers get really tired of every time they build having to wait 15 or 20 minutes for some really slow pipeline to run and to get that feedback that they need about whether it works or what their next step is going to be. And so keeping it under 10 minutes means less downtime for your development staff and more developer satisfaction. Fail fast. If something breaks, stop the pipeline. Don't wait until you've run 15 minutes worth of pipeline to report a test 5 minutes in failed. Stop the pipeline, report the issue, log it, whatever you're doing. And that way the developer knows immediately that something is wrong and then can work to fix that without having to wait for the entire pipeline to run. We want to automate everything from build to deploy, right? Tests, all of it. Remember, if we don't automate it, one, is really hard to manage because there's too much manual labor involved. And two, developers will skip it in your organization. You have those people, I'm sorry, who will skip steps because they have to wait and they're frustrated. And if you aren't automating, if you aren't forcing them to do it, they won't necessarily do it. You want to use different environments. So for your development, your staging, your production, set up different environments in your pipeline so that you are testing at these different stages. You want to make sure you're securing your secrets and your credentials. Use secrets management, whatever that looks like for your stack and platform. Do not hard code secrets into your pipeline. This creates, one, security problems, but also just creates like a really bad environment for like if a key changes or we have to rotate something, then someone has to remember that it's hard coded in the pipeline instead of being in a one-stop secrets manager place that needs to be updated. And then finally, monitor your releases and your deployments actively. So when these are running, actually watch them run, look at your logs, look at your deployment dashboard, actually see, are things breaking, where are steps failing, and really just making sure that, you're monitoring and understanding the feedback that you're getting, because that feedback is really kind of the point. So our example pipeline with GitHub Actions, right? Looking at kind of a real world example. So we have this build and test .NET project. It's going to trigger either on push or on pull request, and that's when it runs. So anytime someone pushes up to a repo or we have that pull request action, our pipeline is going to kick off. It's going to do a build and it's going to run through some tests. And essentially what's going to happen is it checks out the code, it restores dependencies, it builds the project, it runs the tests, and you set this up with just a few lines of the YAML, Y-A-M-L language that automates this essential part of the software lifecycle. And that's what we're going to work on next, is how do you build out the YAML in GitHub Actions, setting up a repo with our DevOps pipeline so that we can understand more hands-on how this process works. So in summary, right, what is a pipeline? Pipelines really are the backbone of modern DevOps. Without these automated pipeline steps, we wouldn't be able to do most of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. They automate our software workflow from code to deployment, adding in all of the steps that we need in between to make sure that we're hitting those markers for code quality, and they bring speed and reliability and consistency to our team so that we can have more confidence in the code that we're writing. And ultimately, they make shipping high quality software faster and easier. But we do have to make sure that they're set up correctly, that we're not frustrating our development team, and that we're not basically adding a time burden, because that faster and easier part should be included in the package, right? High quality software does not have to mean every time I build, I have to sit on my hands for 20 minutes while I wait for this to run. So I hope you've enjoyed this section here on what are pipelines. We're going to start getting our hands dirty a little bit with GitHub Actions. So look for me in the next video as we get started with that, and I'll see you soon. Thanks so much.